Hi, I'm Arn Menconi and welcome back to our show. Today I'm in D.C. I'm at the Institute of Policy Studies and I'm interviewing journalist Sam Sachs with D.C. Sentinel. And you'll see Sam a lot of times on the Thom Hartmann show on RT. He also fills in for Thom Hartmann when Tom's on vacation. Welcome to our show, Sam.
Thanks, glad to be on.
The main thing I think people want to know about you is you've been meteoric since you've gotten here. I learned about you when I was over at RT. Redacted Tonight from Lee Camp, and he said, a guy you really need to meet is Sam Sachs. He's doing the kind of work that you want to be doing. So when I grow up, I hope to be you someday or maybe be your assistant. But what are you bringing to the game? I've been watching all of you investigative journalists, and you're doing something that's really interesting and sophisticated and clever.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Arn. And Lee's a great guy, and I had a great time when I worked on Redacted Tonight. And sometimes I still get to make cameos on the show, which is nice. But since then, I've moved on. I'm at the District Sentinel News Co-op, which is based here in D.C. And we like to describe ourselves as a watchdog news outlet. Keeping, our motto is in D.C. so you don't have to be. And that gives us all sorts of access, whether it's access to public hearings, whether it's access to lawmakers to stick a microphone in their face and ask them tough questions. So we try and keep watch over how the federal government and federal agencies are using power and for who they're using that power for. And that relies on all sorts of different types of reporting, whether it's relying on sources, people who go on the record, off the record. But a lot of it also relies on just looking at the massive amounts of public documents that are released by the federal government on practically a daily basis that catalog how the government is working. Every federal agency has an inspector general. There's the Government Accountability Office that keeps watch kind of government-wide, and you'll catch reports on a daily basis that really give you insight into how Washington works. And that's what we're trying to do at the District Sentinel, is translate that stuff for the audience and stay away from the crap that doesn't matter. You look at a lot of headlines on sort of liberal news outlets, and they're really focused on kind of palace intrigue. What's the White House soup of the day, or personality politics? Right. And
well, what people ask me is, Arn, isn't it kind of overwhelming? How isn't there so many places to go? So are there, put it simple, I don't think there's more than 10 sources I need to go to start where I want to look into something, if it's the defense budget. Mm-hmm. How about you? How are you seeing this labyrinth of research?
Well, there's an endless amount of resources you could use ultimately.
But you have your kind of go-to sources, and you've developed your ability to say, okay, I could speed read this because I understand it better. So a typical week or whatever, we're
speed reading a lot of internal government reports, but there's a lot to be said. Look, the government has a lot of PR officials, people who know how to talk. And it's hard to get news from them. You watch the White House press briefing, you watch the State Department press briefing and the Pentagon press briefing. These guys are pros in how to not make news a lot of the time. But if you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington, you start to understand their language. You know that when they say a certain thing, they mean something else. Or if they choose certain words, it means that there might be something there, but they don't want to break news on it that day. So at the Sentinel, we've been doing it for so long, we've kind of learned the talk of how the Government Accountability Office talks, how various agency inspector generals talk, how various press secretaries at government agencies talk. So on issues like, the Afghan troop pullout, U.S. troops are supposed to pull out of Afghanistan, at the end of this year. President Obama, of course, in December of last year, reversed course, said we're going to have troops indefinitely in Afghanistan. And the Washington Post and the New York Times reported on that in last December. At the Sentinel, we've been reporting on that for months beforehand, just based on the way that generals are testifying at public hearings. You can tell by the words they're using there. We're not leaving Afghanistan anytime soon. So a lot of these stories are out there that people just aren't able to pick up on because either they're not paying attention or don't know how to.
Well, look, I'm one of those people who geek out, and I've sat in dozens of Senate hearings, and I watch C-SPAN, and I get what he's talking about, because it took me about 6 months to realize they're not talking about what you think you would be talking about. Because when I was a county commissioner, and if a budget person came in, let's call it the sheriff came in, he had a $9 million budget, and I would ask him where he's spending his money, and you'd ask logical questions that if you opened up your checkbook and did your budget, you'd be asking that, and they don't. So then I started to think, okay, what are they really talking about here? Well, it appeared to me, and then this is going to go into a question, and it's a little more loaded than I'd like it to be, but the politicians are always talking about, we have to keep America safe. We have a lot of conflicts. Russia bad. Look at what they're doing in Ukraine. ISIS bad. And then you start to see, and the best example in the last year and a half for me was how they funded the moderate rebels in Syria for $150 billion, and it turned out to only train 6 to 8 guys. But the question I keep asking is, where were they going to train them? Whether they go on Craigslist and look moderate, and how are they going to do it in a place that's war torn? So when you see these conversations, what are some of the things? I go to Aspen Ideas Fest all the time. This will play in Aspen too. But and when you listen to these officials, you think they're kind of nice people. Mm-hmm. They don't think before they walk up the stage, I'm going to lie now. Well, what are they really doing?
Well, look, the government officials who are testifying at a lot of these hearings, they're talking in code. Now, if you look at the way the politicians talk, they're grandstanding most of the time. They're asking questions and saying words that they can then replay to their constituents and say, look, I've been tough on ISIS. Look at my question. One big problem with Washington, and a reason why we started the Sentinel to kind of break it down, is the problem of conventional thinking, conventional wisdom around here. Because
it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. The Syria Train and Equip program that was initiated last January was never going to work. It was a complete failure. What we're doing is the plan is to pull people off the battlefield, so-called moderates that are going to be vetted. They're going to people who want to topple the Assad government is who we're going after. Right. These people are fighting alongside Islamic State fighters who also want to topple the Assad government. And when these guys are in the trenches together, they're not going to abide by any U.S. government rules. They're fighting for their life. They're going to go on the ground and they're going to focus on their own self-preservation. So raising a third army force in a civil war to take the fight to one side and then wait and then eventually take the fight to the other side down the road was destined to work. But it buys into this whole conventional thinking in Washington that the Pentagon can fix things, that the Pentagon can engage in, that through war we can create peace.
Well, maybe this is sort of like a self-help session for me here, because I've been coming to Washington for 15 years. I sit out in the lobby of a senator's office and wait to go in and talk to them and ask them for appropriations for my county, or I go in and I watch the revolving door. Right? There's 4 lobbyists to every Congress member. There's 435 Congress people, there's 100 senators. So you have K Street that's going in there, and as I'm leaving, and they're all saying, oh, it's so great to see you, and you take your picture with your senator and that, you watch the lobbyists come in. And those are the people who work the game. And they're the ones who are coming in with the legislation. So what are the things that what you're essentially saying is, look, I'm Sam, I'm here, I'm going to distill this for you. This is how they're ripping off. I mean, a journalist's job is to be a cynic, not to trust anything and then research it and back it up with some kind of empirical study or evidence. And then we as citizens, our job is supposed to go back to our representatives and say, what about there's no authorization for military force? What about the fact that you voted for this budget item and it never played out? So tighten it to the people out there who will actually go onto their laptops and help you and send you stories.
Well, as you come to D.C. often, as you know, you go across the bridge into Arlington and you see the mansions that are built by defense contractors, by lobbyists. Just out in Arlington, across the bridge into Virginia, those are the wealthiest counties in the country, all built out of this shadow government, this lobbying government that exists, that makes all the decisions. An example is a defense contractor called Academy, which used to be Z, which used to be Blackwater. That company has gotten $300 million from the Pentagon over the last few years to stop the Afghanistan drug trade, to stop heroin production in Afghanistan. But heroin production is now more profitable than ever before, despite the $300 million that Academy has gotten and the $6 billion that other defense contractors have gotten to stop the drug
But
trade.
Eric Prince likes to ski in Vail, Colorado. It's good for the local economy in Colorado.
I'm sure he's a real nice guy who just happened to get in the business of creating mercenary armies all around the world. But that's emblematic of a bigger problem in Washington, and that is, look, if we were to stop the Afghan drug trade, if we were to cut off heroin production in Afghanistan, that would be a wonderful thing. But there would be no more money to try and stop the Afghan drug trade. There would be no more hundreds of million dollars for Academy, and the Pentagon wouldn't be spending $6 billion trying to stop it. That's all profitable. That's what builds the mansions out there in Arlington. And it's not just in the Pentagon, it's on Wall Street. You have the revolving door there too.
But the young staffers who are fresh out of college, who are the ones who are doing the research for their congressmen and their senators, they haven't been corrupted yet. They may be naive, but when these lobbyists are coming in, and I won't say exactly who it was, but I went out to go see a former U.S. senator in Colorado, and he had to change his schedule and couldn't see the delegation that we'd come out for. Mm-hmm. And one of his staff person says, Arn, he spends 5 hours a day raising dollars for his reelection. He ultimately lost. Mm-hmm. But, and this was a good guy. I've known him for a decade. So what I'm still trying to stay somewhat, Pollyannish about is that, like you, great guy, you hear this, but nobody's really, saying the king has no clothes who's in office.
Yeah, well, two points on that. One, I used to work on the Hill, actually. I used to be a staffer for a moderate Democratic congressman. This was back in 2008. I started working there. I was advising him on election and transparency issues. The Disclose Act was a piece of legislation that came up that would have forced disclosure of people who are giving money to super PACs, post-Citizens United decision. I advised, obviously, you should vote for the Disclose Act. It wasn't a great piece of legislation. It still could have gone a lot farther, but it was better than nothing. And the congressman sat me down and said, I know you're telling me I should vote for this, but the Chamber of Commerce is key voting this, and I'm in a tough re-election contest, so I have to vote it down.
Right.
I left a few weeks after. It was the exact issue. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. He ended up voting against the bill. A few weeks later, he lost his re-election anyways. So that just kind of shows that these people, their priorities are not with their constituents. Their priorities are with where the money's coming from, the Chamber of Commerce, the fundraising that you speak of. As far as the staffers that work on Capitol Hill, there's this sort of secret that I don't want to be mean to these people. I used to be one. But most of the staffers on Capitol Hill were interns at one point on Capitol Hill. And most of the internships on Capitol Hill are unpaid internships. And Washington, D.C. is a very expensive city to live in. Mm-hmm. So what you get is an intern class on Capitol Hill of fairly wealthy people, of people who can make ends meet and live in Washington, D.C. for 6 months without pay, because their parents are supporting them or whatever, in hopes of eventually turning that into a paid position, into a staffer position, who becomes an advisor to a member of Congress. So I think there's a lot of problems right at the entry point to people working on Capitol Hill, because the young people who work there have just as much influence as the members of Congress. They're the ones advising members of Congress. But right at that entry point, there's a socioeconomic barrier for people. So you're not getting a very diverse group of people working on the Hill as you need to care for the working class or the poor class all across the country.
The other thing that maybe you could kind of open my eyes on is you have a kind of a new breed of media. Defense One is the one I'm going to use as an example. It's a subsidiary of The Atlantic. Mm-hmm. And I'll be looking through what they're doing, and their advertisement will be Lockheed and defense contractors. Yeah. So the story seems to get right up to the jugulars, and then it backs off. Now, Chuck Todd talked about this one time. He said, I can't ask really hard questions to the politicians because they won't come back on my show. Now, I mean, who would think that Chuck Todd can't get guests on his show, right? But there's this.
But in a way, he's right. I mean, that's why a lot of these reporters won't ask tough questions of major political figures, because they're so concerned about access, and so that they can sit down and be nice and chum it up. But there's access comes in all different sorts of ways. You don't have to have friendly access. You can go and fight and have that access yourself. I can tell you right now that at the District Sentinel, there are no members of Congress who are happy to sit down and talk with us. We have to chase them down and force them to have access.
All you have to do is ask these guys 3 questions deep on a particular topic, and then they walk away or they continue to give the same question. So to me, it looks like careerism with some of these journalists, that they think, I'm only going to make my stories look good, and yet. For people like me, it's like I ate Chinese food. I'm hungry an hour after I read it.
Exactly. It's both careerism and corporate capture. I mean, why is MSNBC, it's not much of an issue anymore, but why weren't they beating the drum on net neutrality? I mean, Comcast has a huge stake in MSNBC. All these media companies have ownership in all these cable news companies. So there was a reason why net neutrality was basically a non-issue.
Well, my question is, why is MSNBC only covering a presidential race when there's bombings going on in Pakistan, in Turkey? I mean, Erdogan is shutting down the media practically in Turkey, and he's a member of NATO, and you have to go into esoteria in order to find out
we're going to talk about Cuba and all these other problems.
So let me see if I could put the spotlight on you then, as sort of use a little, be a little critical of what some people are saying about independent media. Well, they're just trying to be not polemic, but that they're just going after the same thing that mainstream media is not covering the news. We're covering the news. The reason I wanted to bring Sam on the show is because I want people who love this as much as they love Game of Thrones or March brackets or House of Cards, that these
all very fun things.
These stories are richer and more interesting, and really, look, if I can figure this out, I mean, anyone can figure this stuff out.
Journalism's not very hard. It's just paying attention, it's getting the facts right, and it's providing context. Right. That's extremely important. That none of these major networks and old school journalism outlets are doing anymore. Nobody's providing context
But
anymore.
People then try to label it as, this is just some form of sophisticated conspiracy theory. So how are you walking that line where, no, this is a conspiracy theory, this is just, look, this is what's going on. We have, here's my big one that I'm always interviewing people on that I get in trouble for. Barack Obama is committing war crimes.
Yeah.
Okay. Drone attacks in 7 countries happen to be things that are not allowed. We went into Libya, and the United Nations was basically stood aside as we committed, and I'm using very crude terminology, went in and started a war in Libya and did a regime change. And now Europe sees us as being, John Kerry says, Europe doesn't like us because of Donald Trump and what he's saying, and they're so embarrassed, feel we're so embarrassing for our country. Well, what was Libya?
Yeah.
If you go into that, what was staying in Afghanistan? What was going into Iraq? Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen 15 years of decimating our reputation. Okay, I'm getting way off the topic here, so bring it back to it.
The best we can do is just keep doing what we're doing and hopefully break through. It goes back to that the problem of conventional wisdom here in Washington, D.C., this idea that drone strikes are good, that it's better than having an occupying force there, and that this is a more humane way to conduct a war. Of course, that's not true. It's creating untold damage, and we don't know the psychological effects of these areas where we have robots in the sky patrolling and what that does to the people below. We might not know the psychological effects of that for another 10, 20 years as these people get older. It kind of reminds me of dropping the nuclear bomb back in the day. We didn't fully understand the consequences, radiation consequences that would exist indefinitely as a result of that stuff. I don't think we fully understand the consequences of this drone war that's going on. So it definitely has to do with pushing back against those sort of, I forgot what my second point was going to be, but it has to, but
they're lying. I'm sorry.
I mean yes, they are lying, but
Well, E.F. Stone said you have to go after it as they're skeptics. You have to be skeptic, and you have to assume that they're lying all the time. But the way you have to explain it so that people are willing to listen to it is not like you're an old man sitting on a park bench ragging on the country going to hell in a handbasket. You'd actually try to bring in some facts.
And how it relates to journalism, and the other point that I forgot that I wanted to make is Glenn Greenwald just wrote an article, I think, over the weekend, about how the media in the West portrays Western victims of violence and terrorism, people in Brussels, Paris, San Bernardino, how they just they tell the personal stories of these people, the dreams that were dashed as a result of this violence and terrorism. That doesn't exist at all when it comes to victims of Western violence. The people who die in drone attacks in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Libya, or what's going on in Yemen as a result of the U.S. helping Saudi Arabia just bomb civilians over there as well. If the Western media told those stories as often as they told the stories of Western victims of terrorism, then people would understand the consequences of these wars. It would break down that sort of conventional thinking that drones are always good, that it used to be called cruise missile liberalism that Bill Clinton engaged in. This stuff is just as bad as the dreams of Republicans to have massive occupying forces.
Growing up, I'm old enough to remember watching the Vietnam War newsreels at night, where you would see the soldiers and you would see the bombing, and that's all been sanitized. We don't have pilots, we have drones. This week in Creech, Nevada, there's protests going on against the drones, and the news doesn't cover any of that. Let's try to bring it home here. There's about a few more weeks before we figure out who's running against whom in the presidential election, and that's all that this news cycle seems to be covering. Do you see Bernie having a chance and being able to pull it out? People I've been talking to this week seem like...
well, he had a good weekend,
right.
Winning those states. He's got his work cut out for him. I think something, before this weekend's contest, he needed something between 57 and 60% of the remaining vote in the Democratic contest, which is doable. It's not impossible. He won these 3 states over the weekend by upwards of 70%. Wisconsin's going to matter a lot. He needs to win big in Wisconsin. The thing that's going good for Bernie is you look at the national polls, they're tightening. Even as Hillary Clinton's people have been pressuring him to get out of the race, saying this is over, the polls keep tightening, especially nationally. And as those national polls tighten, it'll affect the races in big states like California and New York. And if the momentum can swing enough to where Bernie can get big wins in those 2 states and also win Wisconsin, he'll have a chance. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but he's in a way he's already won. I mean, that's an important point to get across. He's already won. Yeah. He's moving the party in a different direction. He's showing that young progressives, young people in the Democratic Party want to move the party far to the left. I mean, you look at the reason why Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman who ditched the DNC to support her, is because she sees young people. She's a young person. She sees the future of this party. And him and I will say Donald Trump as well are again breaking down that toxic conventional thinking in D.C. that elections are dominated by moderates. We have to appeal to the moderates in elections. Well, given the state of the United States right now with unemployment and poverty and war, if you're a moderate right now, you're taking extremist positions. You actually need to be a radical to change things to make them better.
Yeah, I'm running as a Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate, and a lot
better appeal to those moderates.
Well, I'm in a state that's a third independent, a third Democrat, and a third Republican. It's a swing state, and it's a presidential election year. Anything can go in here, except the media in Colorado doesn't really cover races. There's not that much. But what I want you to be able to explain, I'm going to assume you're progressive. Okay. Yeah. I'm wildly progressive. There's a debate going on out there, and it's in my head too. Bernie isn't progressive enough on foreign policy. Yet what I want people to understand is most of the people that I really admire and try to introduce you to are really stoked on Bernie. You know, so nobody's perfect, and they don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good. How would you explain to somebody who's just tired of anyone who's a Democrat or a Republican, or why Bernie's not running? I mean, Ralph Nader did a great piece on the Washington Post yesterday, but are you? I don't want to ask you if you're supporting him.
I'm a supporter of Bernie.
Okay, so how do you justify some of his lack of foreign policy issue?
I think it's a complete legitimate criticism of Bernie. I think a problem is empire. Really.
So why wouldn't you then support Jill Stein, who seems to have more in line with most?
Because there is a bit of a practicality to this. Yeah. I mean, this isn't existing in a vacuum. There are going to be real world consequences to this election, and so I have problems with Bernie's reliance on U.S. empire. He still supports the notion of empire to a certain extent, but if you compare him to Hillary Clinton, there is a big difference when it comes to regime change. When it comes to when the U.S. should engage in removing other leaders of countries and installing, you look down the line, Hillary Clinton has supported basically every regime change thing. Bernie has supported some in the past as well, I'll give you that. But look at Israel-Palestine issue.
A week ago he came out and he said some things that were third rails.
Exactly. That to me was shocking to see a major candidate say a lot of these things. You look at Hillary Clinton giving her AIPAC speech, you wouldn't even think Palestinians are humans in that speech. Right. You listen to most politicians in the U.S. talk about that issue, they dismiss Palestinian humanity. Bernie Sanders
did AIPAC write Hillary Clinton's speech?
He probably wrote both hers and
so
Donald Trump's.
So what happens if Bernie loses and Hillary is running? Then how do you use that practicality argument with supporting Hillary or going for a third-party candidate? Or do you just drink a lot?
I just drink a lot. I haven't crossed that bridge, to be honest with you. I know that in 2012, when it was Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney, I thought that Barack Obama was still the smart choice to take over Mitt Romney, given the situation in the election. Even though he is expanded surveillance, expanded drones, there are a few other issues where there's differences. I'm not a big fan of Obamacare. I think we need to have a single-payer healthcare system. But I knew that if Mitt Romney were to win 2012, then the tax credits that helped me get health care or that helped my mom be able to see a doctor that she's never been able to see before would go away, and that would have actual consequences. So you have to make certain practical decisions when you vote. But I wasn't proud to support Obama in 2012. Am I going to support Hillary Clinton in 2016 if she's the nominee? I'm not 100% sure on that yet.
Well, I'm certainly not 100% sure on that. Look, we've been talking for 24 hours. This is just the edited version of 30 minutes. This is how this man's energy
After we've sobered up.
Oh, but this is his energy. We were reading. We had some research to do. But no, this is Sam's energy all the time. And I want to make sure that you get some information on where you can find more from him. If you really want to have fun, follow him on Twitter at Sam Sachs.
You got it, yep.
And then the DC Sentinel has their own radio podcast show that's on iTunes that's really good. And how often does that come out?
We try and get 3 episodes a month, so almost on a weekly basis we have a podcast episode. You can go to the website districtsentinel.com and you can find the podcast, a link to subscribe to it on iTunes just by searching District Sentinel Radio if you want. And Twitter.
And what are the stories coming up that you're trying to do in the next few weeks?
Let's see. So we've been covering a lot of the student loan debt strikers. There's been some news about Corinthians College debt strikers getting some debt forgiveness that we're working on. There, a lot more needs to be done on this issue. Our next podcast episode coming out next week, we're going to take a look at the D.C. pot laws here, actually. D.C. recently legalized marijuana, but you can't sell it. So that creates this strange legal dynamic here in D.C. And so we'll kind of talk about that as well as all the other states and the kind of the marijuana policy movement right now.
Well, you keep watching him. In 2 years from now, I won't be able to get a hold of him anymore.
That's not true. My phone will always be open for you, Arn.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much.
On the show.
Yeah, that was fun.
Bye.